this is Jane Douglas for GameSpot UK. We're here with American McGee, creative director of Alice, The Madness Returns. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so we know you spoke to Sophia in the States for GDC about Alice, so we've got the basics, but for somebody who doesn't know, give us quickly the setup for The Madness Returns.
So this is a narrative sequel to the first game in which Alice, because of the death of her family in a fire, ended up institutionalized in an asylum and had to fight her way out. And where we find her now is that she's left the asylum and she's living in London. A year has passed, and yet she's still dealing with some of the fallout from that event. And so this is, in fact, a murder mystery. She's trying to get to the bottom of who or what caused the fire. And so once again returns to Wonderland and uses that as a tool to explore her own psyche and to kind of uncover some clues and put pieces back together about that night. Gameplay-wise, it's still very core to that original concept, though we've also had an opportunity to mix in what we call domain-specific abilities, so things like Off With Her Head, where she's actually literally able to take her head off and roll it around in a sort of Marble Madness type of gameplay. You'll find things like that sprinkled in throughout the entire game this time. In the game, she's bouncing back and forth between London and Wonderland. I mean, well, London is the main attraction. We don't want to really spend too much time in London, but we did try to build a somewhat historically accurate model of the places where she was visiting. But you might spend maybe 10% of the entire game in London. Inside of Wonderland, there are different domains broken up by sort of the people who own those domains. So you have the Queen of Hearts domain and the Mad Hatter's domain. There's also a Dollhouse domain, which is run by the Insane Children, which people who played the first game would have remembered seeing briefly. There's also a domain that's dedicated to the Ruin, to the force that's taking over and destroying London. I mean, Wonderland this time around.
This bloody ruin! It's corrupting all of Wonderland!
Seeking refuge from the wicked world.
I think you mentioned to Sophia at GDC, you're working with the Unreal 3 engine, and you've had to fight or work a little bit to avoid that sort of plasticky, Unreal look. Is that a big challenge? What's it about Unreal that makes it tricky?
Well, I think our art director, Ken Wong, spent a lot of time messing with the core of what the presentation, how that comes to the screen, which is the shader system in the engine. And he just worked to try to find art styles that were outside what you might normally see presented in a game, especially in an Unreal game. That's not to say there's anything wrong with the standard presentation that you get when you get that package. And I think a lot of teams, they do create unique looks, but they still end up coming out with a kind of plasticky feel to them. He, from the very beginning, wanted to have a handmade look to all the assets in the game. So even when you saw the 2D artwork that would go out to our outsourcers to create the 3D assets in the game, he would put a little hand with a tiny paintbrush next to the image of the asset that was meant to be created to constantly remind them that they ought to give it a miniature hand-painted look. And so through reinforcement of things like that, he managed to get a look that actually came out to be quite unique.
We've also had something like Tim Burton's Alice. What did you think of his interpretation? It's quite dark as well, so it obviously lends itself to that.
Well, that's the art side of it, and I think that the art side of that was a pretty spectacular film. It's really beautiful to look at. It sounds great, but again, I think that a character-driven story about Alice ought to be about Alice, and I thought that one of the big fatal flaws with that film was that there were so many other characters who were given so much screen time that Alice, in fact, became a sort of background element to what was going on. Even in the denouement, even in the moment where she's supposed to defeat the Jabberwocky, she's told that you don't have to do anything. Just let the knife do its work, and so she's almost like this tool. I mean, she's almost useless in the world. So I kind of found the film was really disappointing on that level because it wasn't a film about Alice. It was a film about all these other characters, and she was sort of secondary.
Okay, maybe a little more left field. Have you seen Sucker Punch?
The first time I saw a trailer, I thought, wow, that looks exactly like what a film about the experience of our Alice character might look like. I understood that was the setup, so I'm curious if they had any exposure to the game because the storyline setups are very similar.
Do you think there's material in that for a film then, Alice the film?
Absolutely, and I think that there's still a chance that this Alice will someday see the light as a film, but the Hollywood process can be very slow, and then all of a sudden something just happens, and so I'm not holding my breath, but we'll see.
Okay, finally, Alice as a game, as a third-person action adventure, as a platformer, is pretty unique, is dark, and there's not a lot else like it. Do you see that as a massive opportunity because it is different, or perhaps it's tricky to sell to people who are used to kind of different fare?
I think that we don't get a lot of opportunity to kind of break outside the genre boundaries of what we know sells, and that when a marketing department sees a proposal for a unique title, there's often a lot of nervousness because they don't know how to categorize it. We got lucky the first time around with Alice, and I think that it's fortunate that it created a space for itself, and that people now recognize it as a category unto itself. And I think going forward, we're seeing a lot of interesting platforms that are coming about that are giving people more opportunity to create new genres. And certainly, I think going forward, we're going to have a lot more chances to do that. So Alice Madness Returns will be on PS3, 360, and PC June 17th.